everyone. I'm Haley Allen. I'm the Director of Family Ministry at St. Thomas Anglican Church, and joining me today is Darlene Bressler. Many people got to know your husband, Charles, through his C.S. Lewis seminar, but today we are arguably speaking with the better half of the Bressler couple.
I like to think so.
um, Darlene has more than 35 years of experience in education, ranging from the elementary level to college. She is a mother and a grandmother. And as we are seeking to encourage parents, as school is wrapping up, summer is approaching, and typically it can be a time to coast, which is okay, but we really want to encourage parents in this area of reading at home and encouraging literacy in their home. So before we jump into that, can you give us a brief synopsis of your career in education, just to give people a little glimpse into your expertise?
Well, thank you. It's a delight to be with you all today. I felt very called, clearly called as a teenager to some role in teaching. I never dreamt that it would end up being mainly on the college level, but I became fascinated as a young teacher with how children acquire language and learn to read. And the most fascinating thing to me was what is going on in a child's mind that we can't see as they read a text out loud or even silently. And so I spent a long time thinking about how we assess and evaluate children's language development and particularly their literacy development. And then I ended up teaching college through a long series of I believe God ordained events, and fell in love also with that 18 to 22-year-old group. And so I've had a wonderful time working in public schools with college students and mentoring teachers and doing lots of presentations and research across the state of New York, where we lived for most of our career. And so it was a real delight to have that opportunity and to be salt and light, mainly in our public school systems. And I thank the Lord for that opportunity.
It's amazing. Well, I think that anybody that knows you will be eager to hear whatever you have to say, regardless of your years of experience, because you're truly a wise and extraordinarily kind person. So I'm really grateful that you took the time out of your day today. The first thing I wanted to talk about is, how did you, as a mom with this professional experience that you had in education, how did you encourage reading with her at home?
We have one daughter, our only child, who is a very precious gift from the Lord. And the business of encouraging literacy was embarrassingly easy for us. And I want to say that really upfront, because she grew up in a home with two college professors.
Yeah.
And so when she was born, we were already in our college positions. So our house was filled with books.
Mm-hmm.
And she grew up in a small rural college town in Western New York State. And everybody she knew lived in a house filled with books.
Yeah.
And so reading was just a way of life. But having said that, I also want to emphasize that it's not always easy for children who grow up in environments surrounded by books to find their own path.
Yeah.
And some kids aren't going to spend their lives reading fiction. They might be more inclined to reading informational texts or scientific journals or technical journals, or whatever the case may be. But the key, I think, to developing literate children is simply to surround them with books and texts and to model the kind of reading and thinking life that is best for children's development. So it just came natural to us. It was like the air that we breathed. And we spent a lot of time reading to her and reading ourselves, of course. But interestingly, we didn't have the competition with screen time that parents currently have. We only had one screen in our house, and when she was growing up, and that was a TV. And we didn't even have video games. We just missed the whole video game scene.
Yeah.
So I understand that these days there are different kinds of literacies. There are multiple kinds of literacies. Digital literacy is incredibly important as well. And so I think, again, it's finding the balance and carefully modeling and encouraging the kind of literacy that children need, first of all, to be followers of Jesus Christ, and then to be citizens in our democracy.
Yeah, that leads me into the next question. And I feel like you've kind of answered this already, but tapping into that, encouraging the literacy that maybe is the best fit for that child, what would you say to a parent whose child, unlike yours, has no interest in
Yeah,
any kind of literacy?
yeah. That's a huge challenge, and I've worked with a number of children and even young adults who wanted to be teachers and they weren't readers or writers, and that definitely presents some serious challenges. But I would encourage parents in general to follow the child's lead
Mm.
and find their interests and then connect them somehow with text through that.
Yeah.
You, for example, if a child is very interested in animals
Mm.
or dinosaurs or whatever the case may be, Legos, you can build on that interest by rewarding them for reading about dinosaurs
Mm.
in some way and connected to their interest. A child who is particularly interested in seeing a movie, we're blessed today that many movies have books. Sometimes the book comes first, sometimes the book comes second, but you can always say something like, let's take a look at the book and
Mhm.
then we'll watch the movie, or let's watch the movie and then we'll read the book, whatever works best for your child. So following that child's interests, and with the advent of interactive texts, I think that on a Kindle or whatever your computer, whatever your medium happens to be,
Mhm.
you can find what interests the child and connect it to what's easy for the child to get into in terms of various kinds of texts. But
Mhm.
it's not an easy path, and it takes time, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it will come. I'm convinced of that.
And it's really encouraging when you see that spark when I've had students in my past that we were just struggling to reach, and if you found that one thing that they connected with, like the dinosaur books or informational text, or I remember I would find these like I Spy books at Goodwill that like you have to look through the maze, and that in itself is a form of literacy. Obviously, like we said, it's not a nonfiction classical text, but it sparked that interest. And then that drew them in and made them more receptive to the text that they might not have liked, but they felt empowered to tackle because they were able to.
Right. And very often that lack of interest is because it's hard.
Yes.
It's hard work. The advent of audiobooks, again, interactive text that the child can read along with,
Yes.
can really help the reading process if it's balanced with other approaches. Comic books, graphic novels, that's all reading and can encourage children along the path.
I remember the first time I experienced an audiobook was probably about 20 years ago, and we had gotten it, I think, from the library, which you can still now. I mean, at the Athens Library, wherever your library is, there's typically a very large selection of audiobooks. And it was Holes by Lewis Sacker. And we're coming back from a swim meet in South Georgia, and it was so hot. And so, if anyone has read the book, the setting of the book is that it's extremely hot and all of the characters are thirsty constantly, and we had to pull over and get water bottles because it felt so real to us, and it was just this amazing experience. So yeah, all those different forms they create those create some pretty impressionable memories, and those connections really are powerful for them. So another trend, other than children that maybe have no interest at all, is as children get older, sometimes parents, they've gotten the child to the point, or they, in conjunction with their school and whoever else is helping with their child's education, they get them to the point where they can read independently. They see some kind of an interest. And so they're like, okay, my work is done. What would you say to that?
Well, life is complex, and it's wonderful to have independent readers.
Mhm.
And well, until the past few months, we haven't had lots of time together as families when you have kids who are also active in sports and all kinds of clubs, etc. So we all know about the busyness of life and the complexities of modern life with children. I would, however, even in light of that, encourage parents just to set some clear boundaries. Maybe one of the positive outcomes that might come from our stay-at-home experience has been maybe we've had the opportunity to discover what some of those boundaries are. But I would encourage parents to set some boundaries and make sure that there is time for listening to a good book together. It might not be every day, but it might be, maybe it's during car rides, or maybe it's during a vacation time. But some read alouds are just invaluable. And when you read with your child, the great thing that happens is you can talk about the book, and you start to build those critical thinking skills that help children determine the biases and the perspectives of authors, help them compare authors, help them evaluate literature, or just enjoy it and build a memory, as you said, and have good times together. We watch movies together. Let's take some time maybe and listen to some books together, or read some things together. And one of the great, I mean, we live in a very visual society, but one of the great things about reading together and listening is that development of vocabulary and listening skills that are critically important to kids as well. And you're doing it while you're building some great memories.
Absolutely. I have had some parents when I first started teaching, and now that will say, I don't know when I can talk to my child. Like, we'll go the whole day and I'm finding a hard time connecting with them. And I frequently think about my dad when we were growing up, all the way through middle school. He would read to us at night, and he would go through the Chronicles of Narnia. Then he would go through the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And with 6 children, it kind of takes a while to make the rounds. But I found that not only obviously amazing literature, we really enjoyed it, but when he would finish the chapter, he would ask us questions. And that was his way of connecting with us. And it would then spark our own questions like, wait a second, what about this? And sometimes even theological questions, or just questions about, friendship or whatever. And so that was his way of connecting with us. And I think when I was in college, I remember reading some research saying that parents often stopped reading to their children out loud by the time they were 5. And I found that so sad, because so many of my favorite memories were, well into maybe even like 7th or 8th grade, that we would be reading together.
Well, and just sitting close to children, just that physical closeness and reading together builds bonds that are difficult to build in other ways. And obviously there are many other ways to build bonds with children, but reading is a really great path to that kind of bonding.
Really. So you also have 4 grandchildren, and you and Charles are very involved in their lives and are fortunate to be in a close proximity to them. What are their ages, and how many of them are currently interested in reading?
They are 7, 5, 3, and 10 months. And all of the older ones are interested in being read to,
Uh-huh.
or reading themselves. Even the 3-year-old can read her books and retell the story and find letters that she knows. And of course, the 7-year-old is developing some independent reading skills. And so it's great fun. It's just wonderful, wonderful to be a part of their lives and to work with them.
So pre-quarantine, what did you and Charles do with them to promote any literacy activities?
Will we read to them often? And that's one of their first requests. Will you read this to me? Um, But we've both taken them to activities at the library, and we check out books at the library, and we'll watch a movie and compare it to the book, and, read a book or watch the movie, whatever that happens to be. There's lots of writing that goes on, lots of at our house with papers and markers. And if you come in our house, you'll see signs that the children have made on doors where they've turned the upstairs into a restaurant or whatever happens to be the case. And so we encourage lots of writing and invented spelling. And it's children can write their way into reading as they figure out the sounds and the symbols of our language. And so it's just keeping it open and following their lead. And we often invite them to tell us a story, and then we write down what they have said, and then they draw the picture to go with the story, and then they can read it back. They've told it to us, so they obviously can read what is written, and that's a wonderful way to encourage literacy as well.
The storytelling.
Yes.
Which does tie into that question we talked about earlier about kids that have no interest in reading. A lot of the digital literacies like games, Xbox, Nintendo, all those things that I've really just aged myself by how I just described that. But those are narratives. It's all storytelling. Mostly it is. And so engaging that many children that might not be as interested in a paper form of literacy, that are interested in that narrative, even kids that are really into watching videos on YouTube or watching shows on Netflix, to validate, okay, well, I might not be a huge fan of the binging aspect of this, but it is a narrative, it is a story. And so how can I tap into that intelligence that they are getting from that?
Right. Exactly. We can also encourage older children as they learn to read to reread texts for the younger children.
Mm-hmm.
And that encourages everybody's reading. And that's a lot of fun as well, to have the children read to you. Or our 5-year-old likes to read to the dog. And
Oh,
we'll pull up by the dog and read to the dog, which is great. It's building her confidence and her understanding of text.
that's so sweet. So now that we're in the quarantine and these types of privileges really have been limited for parents and grandparents, what would you say to grandparents that are interacting with their grandchildren digitally and that want to continue what they were doing before, or maybe start fresh in encouraging literacy with their grandchildren?
First, I'd say it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's better than nothing, and Zoom is wonderful, and FaceTime is wonderful, but it does leave one feeling a little empty afterwards in a lot of ways, because it's not the real thing. And of course, distance is also an issue for many grandparents, and that's hard no matter how you cut it. So, but I think that there are things that we can do to encourage children. We can send them videos of us reading. We can read together. I know grandparents who will send children a copy of a book in the mail, and then they'll have a copy too. And so the children can follow along as they read aloud on FaceTime or Zoom, or make a video, or whatever the case may be. I think this is also a wonderful time to send your grandchildren letters in the mail, snail mail, because it's writing or it's reading, and then they can write back to you. You can do the same thing, obviously, with email or text or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
I send them books as gifts. We always make sure that there are gifts at Christmas and birthdays, or books as gifts for Christmas and birthdays, or whatever the occasion may be. Make one up just for a book. And one of the great resources that's often overlooked is magazines for kids,
Yeah.
particularly reluctant readers. There are amazing magazines at relatively inexpensive costs that can tap into children's interests, and they're full of all kinds of texts. They're not as intimidating as giving somebody a book in a lot of ways. They often have lots of illustrations and pictures that help encourage the text. And if you just can send your child a gift certificate to a local bookstore, or whatever the case may be, anything to have the child look around and choose something that is from grandma and grandpa, that will encourage some kind of literacy.
Absolutely. I know cost can be an issue for a lot of parents, but I
Yeah.
found that there are a lot of ways around that. Like you said, a lot of like we would get our National Geographic magazine in the mail every, I think it was maybe every 2 weeks at the time, and different other magazines as well. That's one that pops into my head first, but it wasn't super expensive. And if we wanted a new book, we got in the habit of going to Goodwill and we would pay $1. And now at some you might even have to pay $1.50, but I think my parents started getting us into that because returning library books was sometimes a challenge and ended up being a little bit more expensive than just buying. And it was a special treat. Like, take a bunch of stuff that you don't need out of your house, take it to a Goodwill, take it to a thrift shop, donate stuff you don't need. And then in return for that donation, we would get a new book. And I've collected hundreds of books myself and instead of spending $25, which is wonderful to support local businesses. We have some amazing bookstores in Athens that we would highly recommend people frequent if they can afford it. But the hard reality is that some people just can't.
That's right. And if cost is an issue, and you do have people do have access to a computer or a Kindle app, you can download incredible resources, electronic resources from the library, and that they're free.
Mhm.
And and here in Athens, we have a wonderful library, and the digital options are incredible. And you don't have to return them. Just accept with a push of the button. It's great.
Absolutely. Another thing, I know Amazon has been doing some really great series. They're basically TV shows, but they're really digital adaptations of really popular picture books for children. But a trick that one of my friends who is bilingual, she grew up and she taught herself how to read and write English because she's a native Spanish speaker by putting the subtitles on her TV. So
Wow.
a lot of people will, if you wanted to, if you have Amazon, watch one of those shows, like if you give a mouse a cookie, or we're going on a bear hunt. Those are two that are really, really good. And put the subtitles on and then see if the child can read along with their narration.
Yes.
And I think that it would be cool if we put together a list of maybe some books and magazines that and some resources that you find helpful and that we can link to this video as just like a list for parents that they can refer to. I really appreciate your time. I think that you're amazing, and I hope that you continue to stay safe and that you and Charles continue to stay healthy during this time.
Well, thank you so much, Haley. This is a great idea. It's been wonderful to be with you, and I just can't wait to see everybody face to face.
I know, me too. Me too. It was so good talking to you.
Thank you. Best wishes to everybody. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye bye.